I sit in the mahogany boardroom of Thompson Industries, the construction company my grandfather built from nothing. My sister Sarah, barely 26 and fresh from business school, adjusts her blazer and clears her throat. "Your services are no longer required," she announces, her voice echoing off the walls I helped paint during renovations. The same walls where family photos hang showing 3 generations of Thompsons building this empire together. I nod calmly, suppressing laughter bubbling in my chest. Tomorrow morning would indeed be very, very interesting for everyone in that room. The coffee in my favorite mug had grown cold while I watched Sarah deliver her prepared speech. When I arrived at the office that morning, I expected nothing more than another routine transition meeting. Sarah had called it herself, asking me to help coordinate with all the board members about finalizing her new role as Chief Executive Officer. I spent Tuesday evening personally calling Uncle Frank, our longtime family friend Marcus, and the new investor Patricia, making sure everyone could attend this supposedly important discussion about our company's future direction. 6 months had passed since Dad's sudden heart attack changed everything for our family. Richard Thompson had built this construction business from a small residential contractor into one of the most respected commercial builders in the tri-state area. When he collapsed in his office last spring, clutching his chest while reviewing blueprints for the new medical center project, none of us were prepared for the vacuum his absence would create. During those terrible weeks in the hospital, Sarah was finishing her final semester at Wharton Business School. Her professors granted extensions on assignments while she flew back and forth between Philadelphia and home, sitting beside Dad's bed, and promising him she would help carry on his legacy. Meanwhile, I had been essentially running daily operations for 3 years, already coordinating with project managers, handling client relationships, and overseeing the financial aspects Dad trusted me to manage since I graduated from state with my construction management degree. Sarah always seemed grateful for how I kept everything stable during her academic pursuits. She would call me from campus asking detailed questions about ongoing projects and thanking me repeatedly for maintaining the business, while she prepared for what she called her inevitable return to help expand our family enterprise. Those conversations felt warm and collaborative with Sarah, frequently mentioning how excited she was to combine her fresh business education with my hands-on operational experience. The morning of Dad's funeral, Sarah grabbed my hand during the pastor's closing prayer and whispered that we would honor his memory by growing Thompson Industries beyond anything he could have imagined. Her voice carried such sincerity that I felt genuinely optimistic about our future partnership, despite the overwhelming grief that surrounded everything during those dark days. But something shifted dramatically after the will reading. Sarah's demeanor grew colder and more calculating with each passing week. She began questioning decisions I had made successfully for years, suggesting that my methods were outdated and that the company needed more sophisticated leadership to remain competitive in an evolving marketplace. Initially, I attributed these changes to stress and grief, assuming she needed time to process both her education and our father's death. However, her transformation accelerated beyond normal adjustment patterns. Sarah started scheduling meetings without including me, speaking privately with board members about concerns she never shared directly, and hiring consultants to review operational procedures I had developed through years of experience. When I asked about these activities, she would smile pleasantly and explain that she was simply trying to bring modern best practices to our traditional family business. The boardroom where she delivered my termination had been my second home for most of my adult life. I had spent countless Saturday mornings there with Dad, learning how to read construction contracts, understanding project timelines, and developing relationships with the subcontractors who formed the backbone of our operations. The conference table where Sarah now sat had hosted family dinners during busy project seasons with Mom, bringing sandwiches when Dad and I worked late to meet critical deadlines. Every detail of her termination speech revealed meticulous preparation. Sarah presented a formal severance package that exceeded legal requirements, outlined a transition timeline for my responsibilities, and even included a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working with any of our current clients for 18 months. The document stack was professionally bound with tabs marking different sections and space for my signature acknowledging receipt of all materials. Uncle Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair throughout her presentation, occasionally glancing in my direction with an expression that seemed both surprised and troubled. Marcus avoided eye contact entirely, studying his hands while Sarah explained how my departure would streamline operations and eliminate redundant management layers. Patricia, the investor I had never completely trusted, nodded approvingly at every point Sarah made about modernizing our corporate structure. What truly amazed me was not the firing itself, but the elaborate security arrangements Sarah had implemented overnight. When I walked to my desk to collect personal belongings, I discovered that all my passwords had been changed, my computer access had been revoked, and my keycard no longer opened any doors beyond the main entrance. Security cameras that had never existed before were now positioned throughout the office, their red recording lights blinking steadily as I gathered the few items that belonged to me personally. The small notebook I carried contained 3 years of handwritten observations about project costs, client preferences, and operational improvements that had saved Thomson Industries hundreds of thousands of dollars. My father had taught me to keep detailed records of everything, explaining that successful construction businesses were built on careful attention to patterns that others might overlook. As I slipped the notebook into my jacket pocket, I realized Sarah had no idea what information it contained or why those details might prove valuable. Standing in the elevator for what I assumed would be my final descent from the Thomson Industries offices, I felt that strange laughter bubbling up again. Not the bitter laughter of defeat, but something much more interesting. Sarah had been so focused on removing me from her path that she had overlooked several important details about how thoroughly I understood every aspect of our family business. Tomorrow morning would indeed be fun, but probably not in the way she expected. The drive to my apartment took 43 minutes through downtown traffic, giving me plenty of time to process the surgical precision of Sarah's betrayal. Every traffic light felt like a small pause to consider another detail of how systematically she had planned my removal from Thomson Industries. The security cameras, the changed passwords, the legal documentation, the perfectly timed board meeting. None of these arrangements could have been organized in a single day or even a single week. 3 days earlier, I had been reviewing quarterly financial reports when something struck me as unusual about our recent contract negotiations. Several projects showed material cost overruns that didn't align with my experience managing similar jobs. The Patterson Medical Center expansion, which should have been our most profitable undertaking this year, was somehow showing margins thinner than residential bathroom renovations. When I mentioned these discrepancies to Sarah, she dismissed my concerns as outdated thinking about modern project management strategies. That conversation nagged at me throughout the remainder of the week. Dad had always taught me that unexplained financial patterns were usually symptoms of deeper problems that required immediate investigation. His favorite saying was that construction businesses succeeded or failed based on their ability to identify small issues before they became large disasters. The numbers I was seeing suggested either serious miscalculations or something more troubling. After leaving the office, I drove directly to our childhood home on Maple Street, where Sarah had been living since Dad's death. The house felt too empty for her alone, but she had insisted that maintaining the family residence was important for preserving Dad's legacy and providing stability during the company transition. Her silver sedan was not in the driveway, which meant she was probably at some celebration dinner with her business school friends or new corporate associates. Mrs. Rodriguez, our family's housekeeper for more than 15 years, greeted me at the back door with a concerned expression. She had been watering Mom's flower garden when I pulled into the driveway, and her weathered hands were still damp with soil when she hugged me warmly. Without asking why I was there, she simply unlocked the door and stepped aside the way she had done thousands of times during my childhood when I needed access to something important. The basement workshop remained exactly as Dad had left it, with his tools organized on pegboard walls and project plans still spread across the drafting table where he had been working on his final designs. The familiar smell of sawdust and machine oil brought back memories of summer afternoons when he taught me to measure twice and cut once to respect both the materials and the craftsmen who would transform them into something lasting and beautiful. Dad's personal safe was hidden behind a false panel he had installed himself, using the same attention to detail that characterized every aspect of his construction work. The combination lock required 4 numbers, and I had watched him open it countless times during my teenage years when he needed to retrieve insurance documents or contract copies. He always used the same combination 0619, representing the month and day Mom was born. Inside the safe, I found documents that painted a completely different picture of Thompson Industries than the version Sarah had been presenting to everyone else. Dad's real will was different from the one Sarah had submitted to the probate attorney, with provisions for shared leadership that would have prevented either of us from making major decisions without consulting the other. The original document included specific language about maintaining the family character of our business and protecting the interests of longtime employees who had contributed to our success. But the most disturbing discovery was a manila folder containing correspondence between Sarah and Henderson Construction, our biggest competitor in the regional commercial market. The letters, dating back more than 4 months, outlined a potential partnership arrangement that would essentially merge our operations under Henderson's corporate umbrella. Sarah had been negotiating this deal while publicly discussing plans to expand Thompson Industries as an independent family business. Henderson Construction had a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting measures that prioritized profit margins over quality workmanship or employee welfare. Their projects frequently experienced safety violations, cost overruns, and client complaints that damaged relationships throughout the industry. The idea that Sarah would consider aligning Thompson Industries with such an organization contradicted everything Dad had taught us about building a sustainable business based on integrity and excellence. Additional documents revealed that Patricia, the new investor Sarah had brought to our board, was actually a representative of Henderson Construction operating through a shell company designed to obscure her true affiliation. The investment funds she had provided came directly from Henderson's expansion budget, essentially giving them a financial stake in Thompson Industries that none of our other board members understood. I photographed every page with my phone, making sure to capture both sides of each document and ensuring that the images were clear enough to read every detail. The process took nearly an hour, but I wanted comprehensive documentation of everything I had discovered before returning the materials to their original positions. If Sarah checked the safe contents she needed to believe that nothing had been disturbed. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the basement door just as I finished replacing the false panel, carrying a tray with coffee and the chocolate cookies she used to make when I was stressed about school projects or teenage problems. She didn't ask questions about what I was doing, but her knowing expression suggested she understood that something serious was happening within our family. Her loyalty to Dad extended naturally to protecting the business he had built and the values he had instilled in both his children. As I prepared to leave, Mrs. Rodriguez walked me to my car and quietly mentioned that Sarah had been receiving unusual phone calls at odd hours, speaking in hushed tones about timelines and deadlines that seemed unrelated to normal construction business. She also noticed that Sarah had been meeting with unfamiliar visitors who didn't seem like typical clients or contractors, people who dressed more like corporate executives than anyone who would normally visit a family construction business. Driving away from the house where I had grown up, I felt the weight of understanding how comprehensively Sarah had betrayed not just me, but everything our father had worked to build. The betrayal went beyond family relationships to threaten the livelihoods of dozens of employees who trusted Thompson Industries to provide stable employment and fair treatment. Sarah was systematically dismantling Dad's legacy while pretending to honor his memory. But knowledge, as Dad always taught me, was the foundation of effective action. Sarah had fired me, believing that removing me from the company would eliminate any potential opposition to her plans. What she didn't realize was that she had actually freed me to take action without worrying about corporate politics or family diplomacy. Tomorrow morning was going to be even more interesting than I had originally anticipated. Jake Morrison answered his phone on the second ring, despite the late hour and the fact that I was calling his personal cell number rather than his law office line. Dad's longtime attorney had been handling Thompson family legal matters for more than 20 years, and his voice carried genuine concern when I explained that I needed to meet with him about urgent issues related to Sarah's management of the company. He suggested we meet at Murphy's Diner on Route 32, a location far enough from downtown that we wouldn't encounter anyone from our usual business circles. The diner occupied an old railroad car that had been converted into a restaurant sometime during the 1950s, with red vinyl booths and a counter that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Jake arrived before me already seated in a corner booth, with a manila folder spread across the Formica table. His gray hair looked disheveled, as if he had been working late when I called, and his expression was more troubled than I had ever seen during family meetings about routine legal matters. Before I could share what I had discovered in Dad's safe, Jake began explaining his own concerns about Sarah's recent legal requests. She had asked him to prepare documents that seemed unusual for normal business operations, including agreements that would transfer significant corporate assets to offshore holding companies and contracts that would eliminate traditional employee protections that Dad had always insisted upon maintaining. When Jake questioned the necessity of these arrangements, Sarah became defensive and suggested that perhaps Thompson Industries needed more progressive legal counsel. The most disturbing revelation came when Jake mentioned that Sarah had been consulting with attorneys from Henderson Construction about potential merger logistics. She had specifically instructed him not to mention these conversations to any other family members, claiming that preliminary discussions needed to remain confidential to protect Thompson Industries from competitive disadvantage. Jake's ethical obligations prevented him from refusing her requests entirely, but his loyalty to Dad made him deeply uncomfortable with the direction of Sarah's planning. As I shared the documents I'd photographed, Jake's expression grew increasingly grave. He immediately recognized several contract clauses that would essentially dissolve Thompson Industries as an independent entity while creating the appearance of a beneficial partnership arrangement. The legal language was sophisticated enough to confuse most business people, but experienced attorneys could see how these agreements would ultimately transfer control of all valuable assets to Henderson Construction. Jake excused himself to make a phone call, speaking quietly near the diner's entrance for several minutes, before returning to our booth with a determined expression. He explained that his daughter Amy worked as a detective specializing in corporate fraud investigations for the state police, and that her expertise might be valuable for understanding the full scope of what Sarah was attempting. Amy could review the documents from a criminal law perspective and determine whether Sarah's actions constituted fraud, embezzlement, or other illegal activities. Detective Amy Torres arrived within 30 minutes, still wearing the navy blazer and badge that identified her as law enforcement, but speaking with the warmth and intelligence that made it easy to understand why Jake was so proud of his daughter. Her experience investigating corporate crimes had taught her to recognize patterns that business people might overlook, and she immediately focused on aspects of Sarah's planning that suggested coordination with outside criminal organizations. Amy's preliminary analysis revealed that Henderson Construction was currently under federal investigation for labor violations and potential money laundering activities connected to several large municipal contracts. If Thompson Industries became formally associated with Henderson through merger or partnership agreements, our company and all its officers could become subjects of the same federal investigation. Sarah was not simply betraying family loyalty, but potentially exposing everyone connected to Thompson Industries to serious criminal liability. The conversation continued past midnight as we developed a clearer picture of how extensive Sarah's deception had become. Amy suggested that we needed to gather additional evidence from current and former Thompson Industries employees who might have observed suspicious activities or been asked to participate in unusual business arrangements. She also recommended that we document everything thoroughly before taking any direct action that might alert Sarah to our investigation. Jake mentioned that several longtime employees had been systematically terminated or forced into early retirement during recent months, always with generous severance packages that included confidentiality agreements preventing them from discussing their experiences at Thompson Industries. The pattern suggested that Sarah was eliminating anyone who might question her decisions or possess knowledge that could complicate her plans. Tommy Walsh, our head foreman, and Dad's protege for more than a decade, had been forced into early retirement despite being only 54 years old and in excellent health. Dad had frequently mentioned that Tommy understood construction operations better than most people. With engineering degrees, and his sudden departure had surprised everyone who knew his dedication to the company. When I asked Jake for Tommy's contact information, he suggested that approaching him carefully might provide valuable insights into what Sarah had been doing behind the scenes. Amy provided her business card and emphasized that any evidence of criminal activity needed to be handled through proper legal channels rather than family confrontation. She explained that corporate fraud investigations required patience and methodical documentation, but that the evidence I had already discovered suggested we were dealing with serious crimes that warranted professional law enforcement involvement. Driving home from the diner, I realized that Sarah's betrayal extended far beyond family relationships to threaten the safety and financial security of dozens of people who had trusted Thompson Industries to provide honest employment and fair treatment. The federal investigation that could result from her association with Henderson Construction might destroy not just our family business, but the lives of welders, carpenters, electricians, and office staff who had no idea their livelihoods were being endangered by Sarah's secret negotiations. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced since Dad's death: hope that justice might still prevail, and that the legacy he had built could be preserved for the people who truly understood its value. Sarah had fired me, believing that removing me from the company would eliminate any potential resistance to her plans. Instead, she had freed me to take action without worrying about corporate politics or family diplomacy, and connected me with allies who possessed the skills and authority necessary to stop her before she could complete the destruction she had so carefully planned. Tomorrow, I would visit Tommy Walsh and begin the process of rebuilding Thompson Industries from the outside using the same values Dad had taught me about persistence, integrity, and respect for the people who actually did the work that made everything else possible. The local morning news featured Sarah prominently in their business segment, standing behind a podium in the Thompson Industries conference room while announcing the Henderson Construction merger to a gathering of reporters and industry representatives. She wore Dad's favorite navy suit, the one Mom had bought him for their 25th anniversary, and spoke confidently about bringing innovative leadership to traditional family businesses. Watching from my kitchen counter while drinking coffee, I felt nauseated by how completely she had transformed herself into someone our father would never have recognized. The press conference had been scheduled for 9 o'clock, exactly 24 hours after my termination, which meant Sarah had been planning this public announcement even before she fired me. Every aspect of the event appeared professionally orchestrated, from the catered breakfast served to attending media representatives to the printed materials distributed to explain the benefits of consolidating regional construction resources under Henderson's corporate umbrella. Bradley Hutchins, appeared beside Sarah throughout the presentation, introduced as Henderson Construction's Vice President of Strategic Development and her primary liaison for merger coordination. His expensive suit and practiced corporate speaking style contrasted sharply with the practical hands-on approach that had always characterized Thompson Industries' leadership. When reporters asked questions about employee retention and project continuity, Bradley provided smooth but vague responses that avoided making specific commitments about protecting current workers or maintaining existing client relationships. While Sarah basked in media attention, Amy Torres was conducting her own investigation into the financial irregularities I had discovered. Her analysis of the Patterson Medical Center project revealed that material costs had been systematically inflated through a series of shell companies that purchased supplies at normal market prices before reselling them to Thompson Industries at significantly higher rates. The excess profits were being funneled through offshore accounts that Amy's forensic accounting contacts were working to trace. More disturbing discoveries emerged when Amy interviewed recently terminated Thompson Industries employees. 3 different workers reported being asked to sign documents they weren't allowed to read carefully, always under time pressure, created by claims that delays would jeopardize their severance benefits. 2 former supervisors mentioned observing safety equipment purchases that never arrived at job sites despite invoices showing payment for materials that would have protected workers from the accidents that had been occurring with increasing frequency. Tommy Walsh lived 43 miles outside town on a small ranch where he raised quarter horses and maintained a workshop that showcased the craftsmanship skills Dad had always admired. When I called to request a meeting, his initial response was cautious, but his tone warmed significantly when I mentioned discovering irregularities in recent company operations that Dad would never have tolerated. Tommy agreed to meet that afternoon, suggesting that he had been waiting for someone to start asking the right questions about what had been happening at Thompson Industries. The ranch house sat on 12 acres of rolling pasture surrounded by white oak trees that were probably a century old. Tommy greeted me at his front door wearing the same type of work clothes he had worn during 15 years of construction projects, and his firm handshake conveyed the same reliability that had made him Dad's most trusted supervisor. His wife brought sweet tea and homemade cookies before discreetly leaving us alone to discuss business matters that were clearly weighing heavily on Tommy's mind. Tommy's forced retirement had resulted from his refusal to approve substandard materials for the Patterson Medical Center project. Sarah had presented him with invoices for safety equipment that cost significantly less than the products Thompson Industries typically used, explaining that budget pressures required more efficient purchasing decisions. When Tommy pointed out that the proposed materials didn't meet industry safety standards, Sarah accused him of being resistant to change and unwilling to support company modernization efforts. The conversation escalated when Tommy discovered that several recent workplace accidents could have been prevented by proper safety equipment that had been ordered and paid for, but never delivered to job sites. 3 workers had been injured seriously enough to require emergency room treatment, and each incident had been followed by generous financial settlements and non-disclosure agreements that prevented the injured employees from discussing what had happened. Tommy's insistence on investigating these patterns had ultimately led to his termination, disguised as early retirement, with benefits that required his silence about company operations. But Tommy had been documenting everything, maintaining detailed records of material orders, safety violations, and financial discrepancies that he planned to report to industry oversight agencies after his mandatory silence period expired. His evidence included photographs of inadequate safety equipment, copies of invoices showing payments for materials that were never delivered, and testimonials from workers who had been pressured to accept unsafe working conditions rather than risk losing their jobs. Amy arrived at Tommy's ranch during the early evening, bringing additional evidence that transformed our understanding of how extensively Sarah had been defrauding Thompson Industries. Her investigation had uncovered a network of shell companies connecting Henderson Construction to the inflated material costs, safety equipment fraud, and offshore accounts where stolen funds were being hidden. The money trail led directly to Bradley Hutchins, who had been orchestrating the embezzlement scheme while maintaining his role at Henderson Construction. Mrs. Rodriguez called my phone during our meeting to share information that made the situation even more sinister. She had been quietly recording Sarah's phone conversations since Dad's death, concerned about how drastically her personality had changed and worried about protecting the family business he had worked so hard to build. The recordings revealed that Sarah's entire relationship with Bradley had been calculated from the beginning, designed to give Henderson Construction inside access to Thompson Industries operations and client relationships. The most shocking revelation came when Mrs. Rodriguez played a conversation where Sarah discussed adjusting Dad's medication during the months before his death. Rather than giving him the cardiac medications his doctor had prescribed, she had been substituting similar-looking pills that would weaken his heart while creating the appearance of compliance with medical treatment. Dad's fatal heart attack had not been the result of natural progression of his cardiac condition, but the deliberate outcome of Sarah's systematic poisoning designed to accelerate his death and clear her path to control the company. Amy immediately contacted federal authorities about the potential murder, while Jake began preparing legal documents to freeze all Thompson Industries assets and prevent Sarah from completing the Henderson merger. Tommy called his network of current and former construction workers to organize testimonials about safety violations and financial irregularities that could support criminal charges against both Sarah and Bradley. The press conference that had seemed like Sarah's triumph that morning now appeared to be the beginning of her downfall. By publicly announcing the Henderson merger, she had created a timeline that would make it impossible to claim ignorance about criminal activities or distance herself from the conspiracy that was rapidly being exposed. Her celebration was premature, and tomorrow's headlines would tell a very different story about innovation and leadership in family business management. As I drove home from Tommy's ranch, I felt the weight of understanding that Sarah hadn't simply betrayed our family business, but had murdered our father to clear her path to power and profit. The laughter that had seemed so inappropriate during yesterday's board meeting now felt completely justified. Sarah had been so focused on removing me as an obstacle that she had overlooked how thoroughly I understood every aspect of Thompson Industries operations and how many people were willing to help preserve Dad's legacy against someone who would destroy everything he had built. Tomorrow morning would indeed be fun, but justice was going to be even more satisfying. The revelation about Dad's murder changed everything, transforming what had seemed like corporate betrayal into something much darker and more urgent. Amy Torres contacted the district attorney's office within hours of hearing Mrs. Rodriguez's recordings, and by dawn on Friday morning, federal agents were reviewing evidence that could support charges ranging from fraud to homicide. The investigation that had begun as family disagreement about business direction was now a criminal matter involving multiple law enforcement agencies. Jake Morrison worked through the night preparing emergency legal motions that would freeze all Thompson Industries assets and prevent Sarah from completing any financial transactions related to the Henderson merger. His decades of experience with corporate law had never included murder cases, but his determination to protect Dad's legacy drove him to research precedents and procedural requirements that would give us the strongest possible legal foundation for stopping Sarah before she could transfer any additional company resources to her criminal associates. Uncle Frank received my call at 6 o'clock Friday morning, and his immediate response was to suggest an emergency meeting at his house rather than any location connected to Thompson Industries where Sarah might have installed surveillance equipment. Frank had been Dad's younger brother and closest advisor for 40 years, and his own suspicions about Sarah's recent behavior had been growing despite his reluctance to question family relationships. When I explained what we had discovered, Frank's shock quickly transformed into determined anger about how completely Sarah had betrayed everyone who trusted her. The meeting at Uncle Frank's house brought together everyone who had been questioning Sarah's leadership, but hesitant to take action without clear evidence of wrongdoing. Marcus Wellington, our family friend and longtime board member, arrived looking haggard and stressed, admitting that Sarah had been pressuring him to support the Henderson merger by threatening to expose gambling debts that could have destroyed his reputation in the business community. Patricia Newman, the supposed investor who was actually representing Henderson Construction, had been using Marcus's financial vulnerabilities to ensure his compliance with her agenda. Marcus's confession revealed another layer of the conspiracy that had been developing for months, while I focused on daily operations, without recognizing the political manipulation happening around me. Sarah had been systematically identifying vulnerabilities among board members that could be exploited to ensure their support for her plans, using private investigators to gather personal information that could be used for blackmail or coercion. Marcus had signed documents approving the Henderson merger not because he believed it was beneficial for Thompson Industries, but because he feared the consequences of opposing Sarah's demands. Uncle Frank admitted that he had been gathering his own evidence of suspicious activities, including financial records showing unusual payments to consulting companies that didn't appear to provide any actual services to Thompson Industries. His engineering background had made him naturally skeptical of Sarah's explanations for cost overruns and project delays that didn't match his experience managing large construction operations. When Amy Torres reviewed Frank's documentation, she immediately recognized patterns consistent with money laundering and embezzlement schemes she had investigated previously. The evidence we had accumulated painted a comprehensive picture of criminal conspiracy involving multiple parties working together to systematically steal from Thompson Industries while positioning themselves to acquire company assets through the Henderson merger. Sarah's role as the primary architect of this scheme was clear from the recordings Mrs. Rodriguez had gathered, but the involvement of Bradley Hutchins, Patricia Newman, and Henderson Construction executives suggested that we were dealing with an organized criminal enterprise rather than isolated family betrayal. Amy explained that federal investigators were already monitoring Henderson Construction's financial activities as part of a broader investigation into municipal contract fraud and labor violations. Our evidence about the Thompson Industries conspiracy would strengthen their existing case while providing additional charges that could result in significant prison sentences for everyone involved. The challenge was coordinating our actions with ongoing federal investigations while protecting the interests of Thompson Industries employees and clients who had no involvement in the criminal activities. Daniel Kim, an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate crime stories, had contacted Amy after hearing rumors about unusual activities at Thompson Industries. His research into Henderson Construction's business practices had revealed a pattern of acquiring smaller companies through fraudulent schemes similar to what Sarah was attempting. Daniel agreed to delay publication of his story until criminal charges were filed, but his investigation had already identified several other family businesses that had been destroyed through similar conspiracies orchestrated by Henderson Construction and its associates. Tommy Walsh's network of construction workers proved invaluable for documenting the scope of safety violations and financial fraud that Sarah had been concealing. Workers from multiple projects provided testimonials about being forced to use inadequate safety equipment, receiving paychecks that didn't match their recorded hours, and witnessing material deliveries that didn't correspond to invoices showing payment for much larger quantities of supplies. The pattern of systematic theft was clear from dozens of individual incidents that workers had been afraid to report because they feared losing their jobs. By Friday evening, we had assembled evidence that would support criminal charges against Sarah Bradley Hutchins, Patricia Newman, and several Henderson Construction executives. Amy coordinated with federal agents to ensure that our documentation would supplement their ongoing investigation rather than interfering with existing legal procedures. Jake prepared emergency motions that would be filed Monday morning to freeze Thompson Industries' assets and remove Sarah from any position of authority within the company. Uncle Frank made a discovery that provided the perfect legal foundation for our counterattack. While reviewing Dad's original corporate charter and company founding documents, he found language that had been included at Grandfather's insistence when Thompson Industries was first incorporated. The charter required unanimous consent from all family shareholders for any sale, merger, or transfer of company assets, and it specifically prohibited any individual family member from making such decisions without consulting other family owners. Sarah's termination of my employment was not just morally wrong, but legally invalid according to the company's founding documents. Her entire merger agreement with Henderson Construction was null and void because she lacked the legal authority to negotiate such arrangements without my consent as a co-owner of Thompson Industries. Every document she had signed, every agreement she had made, and every financial transaction she had authorized during the past 6 months was legally meaningless. Frank's discovery meant that we could stop the Henderson merger immediately through legal action based on corporate charter violations, while federal agents pursued criminal charges based on the fraud and murder evidence we had uncovered. Sarah had been so focused on removing me from the company that she had never bothered to research the legal requirements for the actions she was taking, assuming that Dad's death had given her unlimited authority to make whatever decisions she wanted about Thompson Industries operations. Jake scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday morning, using his authority as corporate counsel to require attendance from all board members. Sarah would arrive expecting to finalize the Henderson merger paperwork, only to discover that her entire conspiracy had been exposed, and that federal agents were waiting to arrest everyone involved in the criminal enterprise that had nearly destroyed our family business. The weekend passed slowly as we prepared for Monday's confrontation, but I felt increasingly confident that justice would prevail and that Dad's legacy could be preserved for the people who truly understood its value. Sarah's laughter would soon be replaced by handcuffs, and Thompson Industries would finally be free from the criminal conspiracy that had nearly destroyed everything our family had worked 3 generations to build. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that Dad had always loved for construction work, clear skies and cool temperatures that made outdoor projects comfortable for everyone involved. I arrived at the Thompson Industries offices at 7:32 hours before the emergency board meeting. Jake had scheduled wanting time to prepare mentally for what would probably be the most important day in our company's 70-year history. Federal agents had been gathering since dawn, coordinating with local police to ensure that Sarah and her criminal associates would be arrested efficiently without creating safety risks for employees or bystanders. Sarah's silver sedan pulled into the executive parking space at exactly 9:15 minutes late for the meeting she assumed would finalize her Henderson Construction merger. She walked confidently through the main entrance, wearing Dad's Navy suit, again carrying a leather briefcase filled with documents she expected to sign that would complete the transfer of Thompson Industries' assets to her criminal associates. Her expression radiated satisfaction and anticipation as she rode the elevator to the boardroom where she believed her months of planning would finally achieve their intended results. Bradley Hutchins arrived simultaneously through the building's rear entrance, accompanied by Patricia Newman and 2 Henderson Construction executives who carried additional legal documents and financial agreements. Their confident demeanor suggested they had no awareness that federal investigators had been monitoring their communications and tracking their financial activities for weeks. The entire criminal conspiracy was walking directly into a carefully orchestrated trap that would end their scheme while preserving Thompson Industries for legitimate business operations. The boardroom looked exactly as it had during my termination meeting 3 days earlier, with the same mahogany table and family photographs that represented 3 generations of honest business practices. But the atmosphere felt completely different as Sarah took her usual seat at the head of the table, expecting to preside over the final destruction of everything Dad had worked to build. She smiled warmly at Uncle Frank, and Marcus, apparently unaware that both men now understood the full scope of her betrayal and were prepared to testify about her criminal activities. Jake Morrison entered the boardroom at precisely 9:30, accompanied by Amy Torres, in her official capacity as a detective investigating corporate fraud. Sarah's expression shifted from confidence to confusion as she realized that law enforcement was participating in what she had expected to be a routine business meeting. When I walked through the door, followed by Tommy Walsh and Mrs. Rodriguez, Sarah's confusion transformed into panic as she began to understand that her conspiracy had been discovered and documented. The presentation of evidence took nearly an hour, with Jake methodically reviewing each aspect of Sarah's criminal activities, while Amy explained how the various fraudulent schemes violated both state and federal laws. Mrs. Rodriguez played selected portions of the recorded phone conversations where Sarah discussed poisoning Dad's medication and coordinating with Henderson Construction to steal company assets. Tommy provided detailed documentation of safety violations and material theft that had endangered workers while generating illegal profits for the conspiracy. Sarah's initial response was denial and deflection, claiming that any irregularities were the result of misunderstandings or business decisions that had been taken out of context by people who didn't understand modern corporate management strategies. She accused me of orchestrating a vindictive campaign against her because I was jealous of her business education and resentful about being terminated from a company that needed more sophisticated leadership than I was capable of providing. But as the evidence accumulated, Sarah's denials became less convincing, and her composure began to crack under the weight of documentation that clearly established her guilt. Bradley Hutchins attempted to intimidate the board members by threatening legal action for interfering with legitimate business arrangements, but his threats lost their impact when Amy Torres informed him that federal agents were waiting outside the building with arrest warrants for everyone involved in the conspiracy. Patricia Newman tried to leave the meeting when she realized that her true identity and criminal activities had been exposed, but she discovered that building security had been coordinated with law enforcement to prevent anyone from departing before arrests could be completed. Henderson Construction's executives demanded to speak with their attorneys, but federal agents explained that legal representation could be arranged after they were formally charged with fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The moment that provided the most satisfaction came when Jake presented Dad's real will and the corporate charter provisions that invalidated every decision Sarah had made during her illegal tenure as chief executive officer. Her termination of my employment violated company bylaws. Her negotiations with Henderson Construction exceeded her legal authority, and every financial transaction she had authorized would need to be reversed to comply with Thompson Industries' founding documents and fiduciary obligations. Sarah's complete breakdown occurred when Mrs. Rodriguez played the recording where she discussed adjusting Dad's medication to accelerate his death. Faced with clear evidence of premeditated murder, Sarah suffered what appeared to be a psychological collapse, sobbing uncontrollably while admitting that she had never wanted to run a construction company, but only wanted to cash out her inheritance and disappear with Bradley to start a new life, somewhere that family obligations wouldn't interfere with her personal ambitions. Federal agents entered the boardroom at 10:45 to arrest Sarah, Bradley, Patricia, and the Henderson Construction executives on charges that included fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and murder. Amy Torres read Sarah her rights, while she continued crying and babbling about how the pressure of living up to Dad's reputation had driven her to make desperate decisions that spiraled out of control. Her transformation from confident corporate executive to broken criminal defendant provided a stark illustration of how thoroughly her schemes had collapsed. Uncle Frank was appointed interim chief executive officer by unanimous board vote, with Marcus Wellington resuming his role as treasurer under new oversight procedures that would prevent any individual from making major financial decisions without board approval. Tommy Walsh returned as head of operations with authority to implement safety improvements and quality standards that would restore Thompson Industries' reputation for excellence in construction services. The Henderson Construction merger was formally dissolved, with all associated contracts declared null and void due to fraud and misrepresentation. Federal agents seized documents and financial records that would support ongoing investigations into municipal contract fraud and money laundering activities that extended far beyond the Thompson Industries conspiracy. Several other construction companies that had been victimized by similar schemes would benefit from the evidence we had gathered. Mrs. Rodriguez was recognized as a company hero whose courage and loyalty had prevented the complete destruction of Thompson Industries and possibly saved other businesses from similar criminal conspiracies. Jake Morrison was retained as corporate counsel with expanded authority to review all major business decisions and ensure compliance with legal requirements that would protect the company from future fraud attempts. As federal agents escorted Sarah from the building in handcuffs, I felt a complex mixture of sadness about family relationships that could never be repaired and satisfaction that justice was being served for Dad and everyone else she had betrayed. The sister I had grown up with was gone, replaced by someone whose greed and ambition had transformed her into a criminal, willing to commit murder for financial gain. But Thompson Industries would survive and continue honoring the values Dad had instilled in everyone who truly understood what it meant to build something meaningful and lasting. The laughter that had seemed so inappropriate during my termination meeting now felt like prophetic anticipation of justice that was finally being served. 6 months after Sarah's arrest, Thompson Industries had not only survived the criminal conspiracy that nearly destroyed our family business, but had grown stronger and more successful than ever before. Uncle Frank's leadership as chief executive officer combined decades of engineering expertise with the same values-based approach that had made Dad's management so effective. Our reputation for quality construction and ethical business practices had been reinforced rather than damaged by the federal investigation that exposed and eliminated the criminal elements that had infiltrated our operations. The criminal trials proceeded efficiently through federal court, with Sarah pleading guilty to charges of fraud conspiracy and second-degree murder in exchange for a 25-year prison sentence that included mandatory psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Bradley Hutchins received 30 years for his role as the primary architect of the embezzlement scheme, while Patricia Newman and the Henderson construction executives were sentenced to terms ranging from 15 to 20 years for their participation in the broader conspiracy that had victimized multiple businesses throughout the region. Henderson Construction itself was dissolved as a corporate entity, with its legitimate assets distributed among the companies and individuals who had been defrauded through their various criminal schemes. The federal investigation revealed that Thompson Industries was just one of 12 family businesses that had been targeted for similar takeover attempts, and our evidence helped prosecutors secure convictions that protected other potential victims from experiencing the same betrayal and financial devastation that we had narrowly avoided. Tommy Walsh returned as head of operations with enthusiasm and energy that reminded everyone why Dad had valued his expertise so highly. His first priority was implementing comprehensive safety improvements that eliminated all the hazardous conditions Sarah had created through her fraudulent equipment purchases and corner-cutting maintenance practices. Worker injuries dropped to 0 within 3 months, while productivity increased significantly because employees felt confident that Thompson Industries genuinely cared about their well-being and professional development. Mrs. Rodriguez was honored with a full company pension and a permanent position as family liaison, ensuring that her institutional knowledge about Thompson Industries' history and values would be preserved for future generations. Her courage in documenting Sarah's criminal activities had saved not just our family business, but probably prevented additional murders if Sarah's conspiracy had been allowed to continue. The employees voted unanimously to name the company's new safety training center in her honor. Marcus Wellington underwent treatment for his gambling addiction and returned to his role as treasurer under new oversight procedures that included regular financial audits and transparent reporting requirements. His experience being manipulated through blackmail made him a valuable advocate for other board members who might face similar pressure from future criminal conspiracies. Marcus's recovery became an inspiration for other employees dealing with personal problems that could make them vulnerable to exploitation. Amy Torres joined Thompson Industries as head of corporate compliance, bringing her law enforcement expertise to develop internal controls that would prevent future fraud attempts while maintaining the family-oriented culture that had always characterized our business operations. Her procedures included background checks for all new employees, regular financial audits, and whistleblower protections that encouraged workers to report suspicious activities without fear of retaliation. Daniel Kim's investigative series about corporate crime in family businesses won a state journalism award and generated nationwide attention for the need to protect small and medium-sized companies from organized criminal conspiracies. His articles about Thompson Industries' successful resistance to the Henderson construction scheme provided a model for other businesses facing similar threats while highlighting the importance of maintaining strong ethical standards and family values in competitive commercial environments. The Patterson Medical Center project was completed 6 months ahead of schedule and significantly under budget, demonstrating how much money Sarah's criminal conspiracy had been stealing from legitimate construction costs. The medical center's administrators were so impressed with Thompson Industries' performance that they contracted us for 2 additional expansion projects and recommended our services to other healthcare organizations throughout the region. Quality workmanship and honest business practices proved to be much more profitable than the fraudulent schemes Sarah had been pursuing. I assumed the role of president and chief operating officer, working closely with Uncle Frank to develop long-term strategic plans that would honor Dad's legacy while expanding our capabilities to serve larger and more complex projects. My experience managing daily operations during the crisis had prepared me for the leadership responsibilities that Dad had always intended for me to assume gradually over time. The conspiracy that seemed designed to destroy my career had actually accelerated my professional development in ways that would benefit Thompson Industries for decades to come. The company established the Richard Thompson Foundation for Construction Worker Safety, using a portion of the funds recovered from the criminal conspiracy to provide scholarships for trade school education and safety equipment for small contractors who couldn't afford the latest protective technology. The foundation's programs honored Dad's memory while contributing to industry-wide improvements that would protect workers throughout the regional construction community. 3 months into her prison sentence, Sarah requested a meeting that Uncle Frank and I attended, accompanied by a prison counselor and Amy Torres as an official witness. Sarah appeared dramatically different from the confident corporate executive who had fired me, wearing standard prison clothing and speaking with genuine remorse about the pain she had caused everyone who trusted her. The psychiatric treatment was helping her understand how her resentment about family expectations had evolved into criminal behavior that ultimately destroyed everything she claimed to value. Sarah's apology was comprehensive and heartfelt, acknowledging that her actions had been motivated by selfishness and greed, rather than any legitimate concerns about business management or family fairness. She expressed particular regret about Dad's murder, admitting that her jealousy about his pride in my construction expertise had driven her to eliminate him before he could officially designate me as his successor. The sister I remembered from childhood was still somewhere inside the woman who had become a criminal. But the damage she had caused could never be completely repaired. I offered Sarah my forgiveness not because her crimes were excusable, but because holding on to anger would prevent me from focusing on the positive work that needed to be done to continue building Thompson Industries into the company Dad had envisioned. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting the consequences of her actions or pretending that our family relationships could return to their previous state, but it did mean choosing hope over bitterness and focusing on creating something meaningful from the tragedy she had caused. Thompson Industries' success during the year following Sarah's arrest demonstrated that family businesses could thrive when they maintained strong ethical standards and genuine care for employee welfare. Our workforce grew from 63 to 98 employees, all earning wages above industry averages with health insurance and retirement benefits that reflected our commitment to treating workers as valuable partners rather than expendable resources. The company culture Dad had established proved to be not just morally superior, but also more profitable than the exploitative practices that characterize so many construction businesses. As I stood in Dad's office on the first anniversary of his death, looking out at a construction site where Thompson Industries workers were building affordable housing for families in our community, I felt confident that his legacy was not only preserved, but strengthened by the challenges we had overcome together. Sarah's conspiracy had been designed to destroy everything he built, but instead, it had revealed the depth of loyalty and integrity among the people who truly understood what Thompson Industries represented. The laughter that had seemed so inappropriate during my termination meeting had been prophetic anticipation of justice that ultimately prevailed through the combined efforts of family members, employees, and community allies who refused to let criminal behavior triumph over honest work and genuine care for others. Life had taught me that building something meaningful requires patience, persistence, and faith that doing the right thing will eventually produce better results than taking shortcuts or exploiting others for personal gain. Thompson Industries would continue growing and serving our community for generations to come, guided by the same values Dad had learned from his father, and passed on to everyone willing to embrace the satisfaction that comes from creating something lasting and beautiful through honest work and mutual respect. The most important lesson from our experience was that family loyalty means protecting shared values rather than enabling destructive behavior, and that true leadership requires courage to do what's right even when it's difficult or personally costly. Sarah's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also provided an opportunity to demonstrate that integrity and perseverance could overcome even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Every morning when I arrived at Thompson Industries, I felt grateful for the opportunity to continue Dad's work while building something even stronger and more meaningful than what existed before the crisis that nearly destroyed everything we valued. The future looked brighter than ever, filled with projects that would serve our community while providing good jobs for workers who shared our commitment to excellence and integrity in everything we accomplished together. What do you think is the most important quality for maintaining family relationships when business decisions create conflict between personal loyalty and professional responsibility? Have you ever experienced situations where doing the right thing required courage to oppose people you cared about? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others discover it. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding justice in difficult family situations. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding how persistence and integrity can triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Thank you for taking this journey with me through one of the most challenging periods of my life. I hope Sarah's story serves as both a warning about how greed can corrupt family relationships and an inspiration that justice can prevail when good people work together to protect what truly matters. May your own family relationships be built on trust, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being rather than personal ambition that destroys everything meaningful and lasting.